Welcome, everybody, to Everlasting Veteran. I am your host, Ryan Landry. I am joined in studio with Ken Curtin, and we're here with David Marquet to talk about his book, Turn the Ship Around, and how he's implemented that into his teachings while he was serving. I am excited for this episode. You're going to be able to learn a lot and be able to implement it into your daily activities with your organization. And let's get right into it. Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Ryan Landry, with the Everlasting Veteran Podcast. We are gracious enough to have Ken Curtin, my neighbor and commander of Subbase, to talk about the implementations of the book that David Marquet came out with, Turn the Ship Around. Thank you, sir, for coming on to this episode. It means a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show, and welcome, Ken.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to hear what you got, a little bit of what you got to say, and share with you how I've used it the past really 10, 12 years.
Super.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive into your service before we get into the book and the implementation like that. You went into the U.S. Naval Academy in 1981 and retired in 2009 on nuclear subs, and you had essentially a bad boat and turned it into a good boat, and how you've changed those leadership, kind of structures and mindset is a big thing across the board, top down, bottom up. How did you approach this initially?
Yeah, I don't like to say it was a bad boat. It was poorly performing for sure, but bad sort of implies some kind of a moral judgment to the thing. I mean, the people, the sailors on the ship were trying just as hard as any other submarine. It was really a problem with leadership. I got sent to the Santa Fe at the very last minute because the captain there resigned. I was trained up, and I'd always served on other submarines. And the Santa Fe, being a different class of ship than I was, a going to command, and B, ever been on before, really was a challenge for me. Plus, I was taking over the ship with the worst reputation, worst morale. Santa Fe only re-enlisted 3 out of 33 sailors that were eligible to re-enlist. That put it at the bottom of the entire submarine force in terms of percentage of re-enlistment. And she was getting very poor scores on her inspection. So my normal approach, and I was one of the guys who was kind of sent to fix broken places. So this wasn't particularly unusual, but normally it was in the context of I knew deeply what I was doing. I mean, I knew the technical parts of it. And through dint of me looking at the technical problems and me being the person who made the decisions about how to approach things, I would then get the officers and the crew below me to do what they had to do, and we get better temporarily anyway, at least as long as I was there. And this was leadership. I mean, this is the model that we have. We reward people for making good decisions and being technical experts and knowing the right answer. On the Santa Fe, it all shifted for me because I didn't know all the technical details of the submarine. And it kind of hit me in the face when one of the very first things I did was we were running a scram drill, which is we shut down a reactor, pretend it's broken, and running around doing taking readings. And I order second gear, had 2/3 on the electric backup motor. And there is only one on this class of submarines, only one gear. And that was a mistake. It was a very basic mistake. Nothing bad happened because the crew never did it, but it really smacked me in the face that I need to change the model. I can't be the one telling them what to do. I need them to tell me. Now, we all talk about empowerment, and I'd received this lecture many times. Oh, you are empowered. You be proactive. You take initiative. And it always seemed like I was the one who was the problem. And meantime, I had officers above me just telling me what to do, but then at the same time telling me I was empowered. And it kind of didn't make sense to me. And I was always kind of the guy who would like raise their hand, like, well, it kind of seems like you're empowered, not me. But what you have to do is not give orders. That's what I learned. When they come to you and they say, hey, I got a problem, and they look at you, you don't tell them the answer. You just say, well, what do you, we had a model, which was, well, what do you see? What do you think? What do you intend to do? So what do you see? It starts with description. Just tell me more about it. Okay, now what do you think? Now it's an assessment. We had a probability. Hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I think. I think it's the upper bearing is going bad. 80%. Could be a lower bearing, 20%. And then here's what I intend to do. I'm going to coordinate with the engineers, schedule shutdown time, blah, 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 and then move forward. And now the team is pushing into you. They're pushing up the chain of command rather than the chain of command pushing down and then us responding. So that to me was a huge learning, and it worked unbelievably well. Really, what we did was incredibly simple. I just took everything where the crew would normally ask permission. I just say what you intend to do. And that's all there was to it. Now, that replicated itself throughout the command. We had to change almost everything, the way we did everything. But that was really all there was to it. We got the highest scores in the history of the Navy for operating the ship. Number 2, over the next 12 months, every sailor, 33 out of 33 signed up to stay in the Navy. All the officers did. A couple of the officers pulled their resignations, and it was great. But the most important thing is after I left, more officers, 10 officers from the wardroom became submarine commanders. So in other words, we made leaders instead of followers.
Right.
And that's the story.
Nice. Yeah. And I think it's pertinent because I do see it a lot, after being out of the military and in organizations that don't have necessarily a very regimented structure of leadership skills, leadership schools, and properly learning how to lead personnel in a sense of working together instead of, like you said, kind of saying, do as I told, and that's the, way to do it, or get out, and I see it a lot of times with organizations where you talked about the retention, right? Retention is a big thing. If the culture and the climate of an organization is not great and it's affecting the morale, people are going to leave, so I think what, you've implemented can be also implemented in other organizations as well that are struggling with the same stuff that you did while you were serving, and you wrote the book about it.
Yeah. And then, so now I find myself traveling around the world, talking to other companies and organizations that are trying to do the same thing. Now, if you had to I've seen places that are too loosey-goosey, and they think everyone gets a vote and everyone gets an opinion. And we really try and shy away from that. This is not democracy. And in certain ways, I was still very strict. I was very strict in how we ran meetings. I was very strict in the words that we used. For example, if you came up to me and said they didn't do the right, they didn't charge the batteries, they didn't leave the gear hanging in the gear locker properly, I wouldn't talk to you, because we had a rule, no they on Santa Fe. And so we had rules, and we enforced them, but the rules were more about the structure of the interaction. And that let me release control of, okay, should we turn left or right or start the reactor or not? Well, you tell me.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, I see it a lot of times. I saw it in the military and the changes, and I saw it you're in the military right now, Ken. So kind of chime in with this, what is kind of the, obviously you've implemented some of the stuff from the book and everything. What is kind of your leadership, skills to be able to push this out and turning followers into leaders currently in the military?
Absolutely. Thanks. I appreciate it. Hey, and David, it's great listening to you explain what I read in the book. So when I was a junior officer, I had my commander. I think you may know him. I think he's a classmate of yours because he's the one that steered me towards your book before I took command. It was Leo Goff. Don't know if you know Leo or remember Leo.
Sure, Leo. Yeah.
So he was my commander when I was a junior officer, and he kind of used a very similar methodology himself on making me figure out how to do everything myself, right? Not telling me what to do. So before I took command, I commanded USS Wyoming from 2014 through 16. And before I took command, I had a discussion with him about, hey, why were you so successful, Leo? And he, we talked for a while, and in the end, he pointed me to your book. And I picked up the book and read the whole thing before I took command. And fantastic. And I really, what I take out of it is you're getting buy-in from you're forcing your team to buy-in on the decisions that are being made,
right?
Because they're their decisions, right? It's their plan. If I tell them, David, if when I was in command, if I tell a sailor what to do, they're going to do it. But they're doing whatever the captain said, right? So that buy-in may not be there. And so if you turn it around and you have them tell you what they want to do, hey, how are you going to execute that? What are you going to do? Then it's their plan. There's more buy-in to that. And it really creates more of a learning environment. Right. It's my job after command, I was the PCOI for the submarine force. So that's the prospective commanding officer instructor.
Okay.
So I taught all the COs and XOs of the submarine force for 2.5 years and certified them. And so I would use a lot of this theory that I learned from the book and learned from Leo and from yourself and teaching it to all the COs and XOs that would go out there in the fleet. And the thing I would tell them that the hardest thing to do as a leader is to allow your team to fail. Right? You have to allow them to fail in order to be to create a true learning environment. And I think David's book is what really put me on the path to understanding that.
Yeah. And to Ken's point, and, I saw that, obviously the buy-in part of it, and explanation of that, me personally, if I don't believe in what's going on and it's being run poorly and, my influence or my voice doesn't have, any weight to it, and I don't feel like I have any control, and it's more of a dictatorship. You get guys where they'll kind of be like, all right, I'm leaving. I want to help, I want to be positive, and I want to make some changes. But being in that mindset and feeling like you're completely a part of what's going on and embracing everything top down, bottom up, working cohesively, that's not even a word. Cohesively.
There you go.
Cohesively together, right, is, what you talk about, and that buy-in of believing in what's going on. And, David, if you could kind of dive into that a little bit of your thought process when you're implementing that and how you first implemented it and continued it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Ken talking about his time as the PCO. We call it the Prospective Commanding Officer Instruction. Ken, you must have had a very successful command tour, and I congratulate you on that, because you only take the top 1 or 2 captains each year have the opportunity to be the captain who then teaches the other submarine commanders. So thank you and congratulations on that.
Thanks,
yeah,
David.
Buy-in, whether you call it buy-in or ownership,
right.
This is extremely important. And when we talk, I've been working with corporations basically for the last 10 years, and there's 2 big problems: ownership and alignment. And if you want a team to not have ownership, there's a lot of ways you can do it, but giving them orders is a pretty easy way to do it. And don't we wish the team at Boeing, when they were making the decision to launch 737 MAX, or the team at Volkswagen when they were deciding what to do with the diesel engines, or the team at Wells Fargo who was making fake accounts, or the team on Deepwater Horizon when they were deciding to go ahead with the next phase of the drilling, even though they're receiving a lot of anomalous indications, and on and on and on and on and on. Don't we wish these teams had more buy-in? But I interpret that as meaning more intellectual engagement and responsibility for what's going to happen. I don't believe humans are evil. I believe the only way you get humans to do bad things is put them in a command and control situation, have someone person who's misguided, not necessarily evil, tell them what to do, because it's this telling what to do which allows people then to say, well, I'm not responsible anymore. In fact, there have been some interesting and recent court cases involving mariner mishaps at sea, where mariners have gotten hurt and then sued the employer, or mariners have been told what to do and then sued the employer saying, well, my boss told me to do it, and it was an emergency situation. I didn't really have to think about I just did it. And then I got hurt because my boss at that time didn't really know what he or she was talking about. And they've held the bosses responsible financially for what's happened, which I think is appropriate, because telling people what to do absolves them of the responsibility. And so we get people who don't, who abdicate their thinking. And we've all been told what to do. We've all had that moment where we said, well, I'm not sure this is right, but it's just too hard to push a rock uphill. So I can only, I've done that the last 10 times. No one listens. So why am I going to do it again? And then when you multiply that over a big organization, you get just middle of the road, mediocre performance. Now, the U.S. Submarine Force is a highly performing organization. I think there's a lot of smart people trying really hard. We have a lot of money and great technology, and maybe some of the best performing on the planet. But I always think we can do better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I had Dr. Lynette Nersbacher on here, and we had we talked a little bit about your book, and we were talking about the culture and climate within organizations and how, one can affect the other, and, changing, the models of leadership from leader follower to leader. Your book talks about, and you've implemented it, and you've more than likely implemented it based on our conversations. And I see it across, and I think it's prevalent right now after the pandemic. A lot of people want to just work from home. They don't want to take instruction in office. They want to feel like they have more of a command and control on their own level, right? And they wanted to work from home all the time, even after jobs said, hey, it's time to come back. How do you think, these organizations can implement this even more to be able to retain people, which is a big thing, retention, because you see it across police departments right now, all over the country. And I'm a police officer in the last almost 11 years after my military service, and I'm seeing it all over the place, especially young officers, because it's not what they thought, or military personnel coming out, and you have the expectation of the caliber of leadership you had in the military. And if you may not see it, you don't, like we talked about, buy into what the organization is doing, and you leave and move on. Have you seen that within the Navy right now?
Some, right? So the Navy itself is, if you read into the news stories, I don't think it's a secret that the military has struggled with recruitment the past few years. I think out of all the services, the Marine Corps is the only one that's actually made its numbers the past 3 years. So we're struggling with how do we recruit young, talented sailors into the submarine, into the Navy itself, let alone the submarine force.
Right.
Then the ones you have, how do you keep them? Right? How do you keep them? And you have to create an environment. You have to create a work environment that is welcoming to them, that they feel safe, right? And so, and that they feel, in my opinion, I think you have to create an environment where they feel appreciated for what they do, right? And
right.
So it's different from, I've got, my total service is just about hitting 40 years. I got a bunch of enlisted time before I became an officer. And so it was different in the 80s when I came in. The chief would just tell me what to do, and I would say, yes, chief, and I would do it and move on smartly, right? I never dared to think about questioning what he told me to do. But it's not like that today. I think the generation we're used to having all the answers in the palm of our hand right away. And so as a leader, what the challenge I have found is how do you convince those sailors, those young people? And I don't think it matters if you're a police officer, if you're a sailor, or if you're working for Coca-Cola. How do you convince them that the part that they contribute is incredibly important to mission success. And if you can do that as a leader, then that's half the battle, to get them to want to that success of the mission.
Right. And before I turn it back over to David to have some input, and I think a lot of it comes down to, your job has purpose, right? But if, that buy-in aspect of, you feel like you're part of the purpose and you're contributing to that purpose. And I think that's a big thing. And, that's what your, book talks about. And David, what are your thoughts on, helping people kind of get into that mindset of feeling like they're contributing to the purpose and the mission?
I think it starts with the words that we use. We say that we act our way to new thinking, and we also believe that it's people being able to contribute that lets them feel a sense of purpose. If I can't contribute, then it doesn't really matter whether we're making dust to cool the earth or nuclear weapons. There's no, I don't personally feel a sense of purpose. Sense of purpose is not an abstract feeling. It's personal to me. It's what happens to me when I show up at work and I rub my hands together and I'm excited to work on the next project. I think some of these, too much of the purpose stuff ends up being a little bit airy-fairy, and it's like so far out there that doesn't really relate to me. And so I think one of the things leaders can do is translate what might be kind of a lofty organizational purpose, like us in the military, support and defend the Constitution. Well, if I'm doing field day and interim lower level, I'm really not sure how I connect to that. Of course, it's very important because it keeps submarine clean, quiet, maintained. But our job is to convey that purpose and distill it down to, like, what does it mean to you and to me right here, right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, to just kind of, hammer it home, it's not a they and you problem. It's a we and us problem. Right. And, how have you kind of, implemented that through the years and, obviously enlisted an officer, through your teachings as a leader?
Yeah, so I think David hit the nail on the head. He talked about the big mission and getting it down. The term I call it all the time when I'm talking to my people, either my junior sailors, even my direct reports that report to me, is connecting the dots. As a leader, it's my job, our job, to connect the dots, right? To show that sailor in interim lower level why it's what they're doing that field day, that afternoon, that morning impacts national security. And you can do that at every level. Running what I do now is, I have people that are, run a galley and run a police force and all that kind of stuff. And so how do those young sailors understand why what they're doing impacts the bottom line, right. In the military, impacts the mission. For a company, it could be the bottom line or, the mission intertwined together. And so as a leader, you have to figure out how to connect those dots. That's in my opinion, that is your biggest job, is to connect the dots and make sure they understand why what they're doing is important. I spend a lot of effort on trying to do that for my teams.
Yeah. And, David, just to kind of get your thoughts on, so I've been pushing, especially with the veteran community, is you can't have community without unity, and you can't even spell the word.
Right.
Right. So, if you say our community, right, implementing impactful decisions, even at a singular level, say with Everlasting Veteran, doing it in a way where everybody feels like they can contribute and they can get around and you build that community.
Right.
One thing I've been seeing, and it's no stranger to anybody else, is across the country, the veterans that we're losing. Right. And a lot of it, I think, comes from getting out, and you have that lack of identity. You have that lack of purpose, or it's non-existent in the boring, mundane job that maybe you have, or the lack of leadership in which you have in that company or business or organization, where you're continuously trying to fill that void of, who am I now? What am I doing? And what is my purpose? What is my purpose here? And I think when we look at it 2020 hindsight and kind of take a step back. You have to have perspective from all angles, not just, from yourself and what you're seeing, but other people as well. And I think with any type of leadership within any organization can learn from, this book and your teachings and everything else. So David, how do you think this can kind of be implemented with organizations now, moving forward, having more unified front?
The idea of purpose.
What's that?
I'm not sure your question. You mean talking more about the idea of purpose?
Yeah, the idea of purpose of, veterans getting out of the military and, obviously they can't completely change an organization if they're starting, from the bottom, but, using your teachings to be able to kind of find that purpose again as you transitioned out of the military.
Yeah, I think so first of all, I'm quite sympathetic to the feeling that you kind of see manifested, unfortunately, in some cases, extreme cases in the veterans in terms of depression and suicide, where their sense is that there's a loss of purpose. If I were to grade humanity on the goodness of humanity the day I left the submarine for the the Navy, I would have said like maybe 8 out of 10. I mean, there's a few people who I could do without, but mostly people are good. You can believe what they say. They work for the team, on and on. Within about a year, when I was working in, and I was working basically as a subject matter expert back for the Navy, contractors for the Navy. And my first year after getting out, before I wrote the book, my score would have changed to about a 3. I mean, I saw some of the worst behavior. People would lie to me, people trying to steal my ideas, people claiming they were there. I mean, it was terrible. And it was not just a loss of purpose, but it was really a loss of faith in terms of like, really, is this what most people are like? Is this what it's going to be like? And I think since then, I've been working with better groups, and the scores maybe back up to 5 or 6, but it's not. And it's never going to be like it was on the submarine. I've started to resign myself to that. It doesn't get any better. The sense of team, the sense that when someone comes up to you, I don't care what the rank is of the person. If they come up to you and say, "Hey, I measured the pipe and it's this thick," they believe it's that thick. They're not saying it just to fluff their numbers or anything like that. They believe it's that thick. And if it's not that thick, it's because they somehow made a mistake in the measurement, but it's not because they're saying what they think is the right answer. And that doesn't really exist anywhere. And I can see, I mean, it certainly kind of knocked me mentally back a little bit. And I can see how it would have a negative effect on people. I just don't. I mean, you're dealing with life and death. You have a really, in my mind, supremely important mission: defending the Constitution, doing what the nation calls for, being ready to go into combat. And then you have this sort of personal team where we're all relying on each other in a highly intimate way. And especially on a submarine, we would say, I don't know, Ken, about you, but we'd always say submarines don't half sink. They either all sink and everyone dies, or we all come back.
That's right.
Where, meanwhile, if I go to some big bank and I got some all-star trader, they're like, "Oh, I'm building my personal brand because, I'm going to exit here and I'm going to go over to Nat West and make twice as much money." It's like the loyalty, I think, was also lacking. I don't want to paint a super pessimistic picture, but I don't want, don't have your expectations that it's going to be like this and then have it be, because I think it's really like this. I think there's great work that you can do, satisfying, but it's not going to be the same.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you know, is a testament to a lot of people when I talk about it on my show and I talk about with, you know, some public speaking events, and, you know, mindset is key. You know, when you make that transition and you get out, it's not going to be the same. And Ken and I talked about it before we started the episode, you know, filling that void, that the brotherhood,
Right.
the camaraderie, the, you know, you know, the sense of identity of like, this is who I am, this is my boat, or this is my, you know, and I was in the Army, so I'm kind of outnumbered right now. But you know, this is my team, this is, you know, my group. And, you know, I had
Yeah, you
that.
got to find your tribe.
Yeah, and I had that tenfold with Second Cavalry Regiment, you know, and obviously a lot of people go back there and try to get back there because of the environment and the culture that that base creates, and the unity which everybody has. And I still keep in contact with every single person that, for the most part, that I served with. It may be, you know, a few months or maybe a year later, but we still keep in contact. You know, the internet and social media has been phenomenal to be able to do that at a distance. You know, but you have this certain connection and feeling. You know, it's similar to when you really accomplish something, that dopamine dump that you get, and that good feeling. You're you're like, okay, this is where I belong. This is who I belong with. You know, and you've seen that, you know, throughout your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, David talked about it, that, you know, we're all focused on a singular mission, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're an officer or you're enlisted. It doesn't matter whether you're in the Army or the Navy. We take the same exact oath of enlistment,
Right.
right? We all raise our right hand and swear to defend, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, right?
Right.
And there's nowhere else in the world that I know of that you get that you get that singular focus, right? You know, the first day everybody does that, we all joined, we all did that for a reason, to be something bigger than ourselves, to do something bigger than just ourselves. And I don't know where you find that outside there, right? I would imagine in Ryan, in your job, that would be similar in the police force, because you guys are in that same type of environment that David explained. You're in a, you know, you could be in a life or death situation. You have to depend on each other, right? And so I would hope, and I would imagine that your organization and firefighters and those type of organizations, that your well-being rests on your partner with you. You'd get some similar. But, you know, for me, I haven't left the Navy yet, right? I haven't grown up yet. I'm still doing what I did when I was 18 years old, and I absolutely love it. It's the best job I've ever had. So, you know, I'm not necessarily looking forward to when that time comes and they force me, which is coming really quick. It's a freight train and it's coming.
Yeah.
So I just talked to some people in Millington a couple of days ago. That freight train is coming.
Yep.
But I'm not looking forward to it. I got to figure out, you know, how to do that. And so getting to talk to you, David, this has been a highlight for me. Like I said, I read your book, and you know, Leo gave it to me, and I made every department head on my ship when I was in command read your book, and we talked about it. And in my job now, where I command, it's about a 50-50 split between civilians and military. I've actually used some of your YouTube videos, your drawings that you've done. And I didn't realize you actually spoke them, because listening to you talk today, it sounds like the same exact voiceover on those videos you put out, David. So
I don't hire any voice actors. It's just me.
It was fantastic. When I was listening to you talk today, I'm like, oh my God, I've heard that already. And so I use those videos in my training session with my civilians who may have never experienced the stuff that David was talking about, that you've experienced in the military and all the veterans have experienced. Not all my civilians that work for me are veterans, and but they've been lifelong civil servants, but it's still a different mindset.
Right.
And so using they loved it, and I had great conversations with them about it and stuff. So trying to I don't know what it's like and how to find that same purpose when I think what you're doing now is not only your job as a police officer that you mentioned, but this podcast where you're trying to connect veterans and help veterans and help them be successful in that transition is a fantastic way to try and fill that gap that you talked about, right?
Yeah. And it's not just, you know, I've had, you know, we talked about it, you know, civilians on as well, you know, like, how do I civilian when I get out of the military? Well, you can't fully do it because that Army or Navy or Marines is always going to be a part of you. Right. So you can't fully civilian anymore, is what I say, you know.
Right.
You have to do it in a different way. You have to reintroduce yourself as the new you when you get out. And I think a lot of times what happens, you know, especially across, you know, police departments, fire departments, first responder realm, is you have so much different outside influences. It's different than in the military, right? And I think a lot of the outside influences in building the community around the organization, not the organization around the community, right? You can do it both ways.
Yeah.
But you have to have that unity within the community you serve in order to also help that environment within that police department, the fire department, and everything else. And it has been successful in some cases, you know, and we're constantly having laws changed and restrictions and everything else. You know, with the legalization of marijuana, you know, is a big hot topic right now, you know, and you know, is it, you know, they changed laws where, like, you know, you can't go off odor to just get in a car, you know, and it restricts, you know, you policing, right?
Yeah.
You know, fire department, I've never been a firefighter, but I can assume there's other policies and stuff that do the same thing, and laws and everything else. But I do think that within police departments, fire departments, other organizations, like David said, and you said, this can be applied. And this is why I've created the podcast, because it can be applied to everybody, right? And you get out and you're a veteran, you know, you're a civilian. People go through the same struggles, right?
Yeah.
We're human, right?
Yeah. Yep.
You know, so just be a human being and, you know, listen to those feelings, listen to those emotions, actively listen to people of their input, their stories. And that's why I love this podcast, is I bring people on to tell their stories, to be able to get perspective from all different angles.
Yeah.
You know,
Hey, David, if I may be allowed, why did you decide to write the book? What prompted you? You said you did something for a little while as a contractor, right? And then you wrote the book. And what was it? Was it some event that triggered you to do it, or something you had in mind after you left? Why did you write it? And I'm glad you wrote it, by the way.
Well, thanks. Well, my wife told me to, so I did it.
That's a good man. We all learn.
So here's what happened. So when I got out, so I was working, as I said, as a contractor, and it was I was making good money, and but it was really not very satisfying. I would say things, and people would ignore me or not ignore me, and like I said, I also wasn't working with a particularly admirable group of contractors and subcontractors in this program that I was working on. So that was a little bit dispiriting. And during the same time, so I come home and I'd vent. My poor wife would have to hear me bitch about this, that, and the other thing. At the same time, I got a phone call from one of my JOs who said, "Hey, Captain, I got selected for command. Thank you for believing in me. And oh, by the way, I'm the 10th guy. I'm the 10th submarine commander from our wardroom." And I had known, like, because like your guys, I'm sure, keep in touch with you, and my guys were letting me know. Yeah. And then I was like, whoa, 10 guys. So I told my wife, she says, "Well, that's the book you need to write, because too many leadership books in my mind are basically the story is, hey, I was a great leader. You're not. If you're more like me, you'd be a great leader too." And it's really just about the person. And I think leadership's always about the team. It's about others. And it's about what you can do to make the team better, help the team be better. And so, I mean, like you, I was sort of a, engineering and mathematics and technical person, but now I have to write this book. So that was a couple tough years, because I tried to work and write, but I couldn't do that. And so I was just writing. So I was living off my retirement, writing the book. And it was hard at first, but I'm super glad I did it. I really used a part of my brain, which had atrophied, but it's really about storytelling and words. It used to be about technology and numbers and math and line of sight, spatial awareness under the water, and all. You know what it's about. But now I felt it was different, and it really was good for me. I didn't like the first. I wrote it and rewrote. I hated it. I hated not just the product. I hated the book itself. It was terrible. And then finally, I was sort of exhausted, and I just kind of said, F it. And I became pretty vulnerable about, well, this is what my fears are. So this is what I was worried about as writing Turn the Ship Around. And I also wanted to make sure no one thought it's like preordained that, of course, this is going to work. Like, it didn't feel that way at all. It felt very sketchy, scary, and fraught with peril. And I wanted to make sure the reader kind of went along that journey with me. So anyway, so that's and I wanted to show the world that we work can be a ennobling and an empowering place for human beings. I don't like the word empowered typically, because I think, like, to say that you empower somebody else is arrogant. It's like saying you give life to them or something. It's like humans don't need someone else to, quote, empower them.
Right.
They already have power. What you need to do is get out of their way so they can express it.
Yeah, very, very well put. And I just want to turn it to Ken, and I got one more question for you afterwards, David. You talk about implement it with your officers, your leaders, and stuff as you get them into your command staff and everything else. I do believe, like, people even getting out of the military, just joining, right, can benefit from this book to be able to get that perspective, and be able to implement those decision-making things from the bottom up to be all encompassing with the unit.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. It's, because the team that you're leading, no matter where that team's at, and whether it's on the submarine or on, the infantry or in the police force or wherever that team's at, that team has to, one, they have to be competent to do it. Right. I mean, David, when he allowed his team to tell him what to do, that's because he had great confidence in their competency and their ability to do it because of the certifications, qualifications, and all that. Right. So, if you teach junior sailors or junior personnel to think on their own, to not wait to be told what to do, to go out and look for things that don't look right, and then you come up to me with your ideas how to fix it. I constantly tell my team, hey, I am not the smartest person in the room, right? Just, I've got experience and I've seen things, and that allows me to continue to move up in the chain of command, but I don't know everything. And so I need them to come up with new ideas, especially new ideas, right? Things today is not what it was in the 80s and 90s. Right. And so I need them to come up with this. So you have to, this book absolutely, being read by a junior person in whatever that organization is, to understand what their part can be. Right. Now you've got to have leaders that are willing to accept it. Not all leaders are willing to accept it, right? You can't have a leader that shoots a messenger or a leader that disregards what you say, because you do that once, you do that twice, and then your team is no longer going to come up with their own ideas. They're just going to sit back and do what you tell them. So I think it's really, I agree. Junior personnel can get just as much out of this philosophy and learn how to be leaders, and then you're going to teach them to be better leaders as they move up. Yeah. The last point, and I think when we try to relate the military, our experiences here, to maybe in some civilian, and again, I'm talking about this from never being a civilian, right? Is we are okay with training our teams to take our job someday. Right. That you always learn that, right? Hey, I want to train you to take your chief's job. I want to train you to take that job and move up. Right. I don't know that is very prevalent in the civilian workforce. Right. We do that because we know that we're only going to be there 2, 3, 4 years and we're going to move on. Either we move up or we move out. Right. But we're not going to stay in that job. I don't know how well that correlates to the civilian, because you may not want to. Again, maybe I'm looking at those 3%, David, that you talked about when you first got out, right? You may not want to train that person working for you to be that good, because then you're losing your job security. So I think that's something that we're used to as veterans. We're used to our bosses having our best interest for us to promote at heart. And maybe I'm a little cynical, I don't know, but I don't know that would be prevalent in every company out there.
Right. Yeah. And you talked about the competence, and that goes under the mechanisms for success. The control, competence, clarity, and David. With what Ken said. When you apply this stuff, it's teacher, teacher, leader, leader. And it's you're feeding off of each other, right? It's our lessons we're learning from each other, and perspective from both sides of, hey, this is a great idea, this is a bad idea, or this isn't as adequate, so I think that in any circumstance, and David, you can speak to this, when you go around, and you've seen, either successes or anything with other organizations, you've talked about the book and what your story is, what have you seen? What feedback have you gotten from any implementation of this on a civilian side with organizations?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go back to what Ken was saying about training your successor. And Ken, you're right to have that sensation. I mean, we look at corporations, like you look at the situation at Disney where Bob Iger came in as president around 2000, then became CEO not too long after that. Then he was there, and then he finally threatened to retire, was going to retire, couldn't retire. No one else can run the company. Finally left, and then undermined his handpicked successor to come back. So that's an extreme case that bodes poorly for the organization. We're saying out of the 25,000 employees, this is the only guy who can run the company. And it's a clear indication we're not training the successors. We're not building a team of leaders. We're trying to keep all that, whatever that genius is. We're just trying to hold it into ourselves for as long as possible and stay relevant and stay important for as long as possible. I think it's horribly flawed. Fortunately, I think there are a lot of people who do have that belief that we got to train our other people. But this idea of the rotation, I think, is really important. And you don't really realize that when you're in the military. Hey, commanding officer is going to be there for 3 years. Then you're going to leave. So you're not going to train your direct replacement, but you're training your replacements globally. So, for example, I'm working with a company that it's a paper making company, one of the biggest in the world, and they have 33 plants, and so they have a plant manager. So you can kind of think about this as like this is the ship captain or the squadron commander, like these plant general managers, and they have 33 of them. There's no time limit for these guys, and so once they get in there, it's a good job to have. It's pretty high paid. There's a fair amount of autonomy. Sure, there's some corporate governance things that you got to comply with, but they don't want to leave. And some guy might leave after 3 years, but another person might stay for 18 years or so. And now think about that. If you're a person who wants more authority and you're a second in command or like an ops director in one of these plants, and your boss is going to stay for 18 years, but you want to do more with your life, you're not going to stay in that company. Right. And we don't. These are one of the things I took for granted in the military. Well, of course, there's this rotational thing, and then the company, because there's no fixed rotation, they don't have a fixed plan for developing the typically there's like the department heads and the future plant managers and that kind of thing. I think the key is if I were a veteran looking for a job and I knew what I wanted to look for, you really need, like, they're interviewing you, but you need to interview them. You need to test them. You need to understand their culture. And hopefully they're being honest about what it is. And ask, like, what's the chance for upward mobility? How long has my boss, for example, been in his or her job, and how long, what's the typical tenure for these different jobs? And if it's like, well, I had one company, they called it vest and rest, which means you get to a certain position, you're vested, and then you just rest. And then they kind of let the belt out after Thanksgiving dinner, and they just kind of cruise. And then they just block up, they clog the works for upward mobility. Well, of course they're going to have, they're being they're losing market share to nimbler, faster, hungrier companies.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talk to people a lot of times. You have to, prep for your interviews and everything like that. And you have to know about the organization, know about what you're getting into. And that could make it or break it of you even accepting to go to the interview process, right?
Sure.
Because you have to learn about what you're applying for, right? And I think that not preparing yourself for that job interview, you're setting yourself up for failure.
And how many of us know how to do that, right? When you get out of the military, because I haven't had a job interview my entire life, right? I just go where they tell me to go. Sometimes I ask and I make believe like I have say in it, but we don't. And so, how do you prepare? How do veterans prepare? So these organizations that are out there helping them, all the different organizations that help veterans to prepare for job interviews, and what is it like, and help with resumes.
Yeah.
We have a group on board the Submarine base over in New London that does just that. My Fleet and Family Service Center does just that. They prepare, they have job resume writing classes and job fairs to help veterans understand how to look for a job, how to ask the important questions, and what are some of the important questions you need to ask.
Yeah. And, I talk about consistently, like, obviously, if you go and hand a civilian a DD-214, they're going to go, what is this? Right. And not being able to understand what's actually on it, being able to prepare yourself and showcase your abilities and what you've done from that DD-214 to your resume, I think is a big key to setting yourself up for success after the military, because the DD-214 is not going to explain all.
You have to translate it into civilian English.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, one of the big kind of transition hurdles, in the military. Like when I was in, they had the TAPS program, the transition assistance program, similar to what you have.
We still have it now, called something different, same thing.
Yep. Yeah. It's in the military as a whole, DOD, kind of got away from it because we're in the war for so long, nobody was transitioning. Right. Yeah. So like, why are we going to spend funding, to be able to do this? But now we have 200,000 plus veterans ETSing every single year, and between the clog with the VA and, jobs available and everything else, it becomes very difficult. But showcasing yourself in the best way, your best abilities, and taking the teachings from Turn the Ship Around and what you've learned in the military and adapting that into civilian life and learning how to civilian, right, as a veteran, is very important in your success after the military. And I think we can do a better job as a community, as a veteran community, not just saying, pointing the fingers and going, it's a you problem, VA, it's a you problem, military, it's a you problem. Like, take some onus and ownership of what you're doing and find your purpose. I struggled with it significantly. Right. I was fortunate enough to get hired with the police department 6.5 months after active duty. A lot of people, sometimes it takes 2 years to just get hired. But my transition was different. I went from one uniform to another, and I kind of didn't buy into what was going on entirely. Right. Because I saw different stuff where my expectations, like David said, were here. And, I almost let myself down because I set them here and what I was used to.
I think it's about managing expectations, your own, when you get out. What are realistic expectations for the business world in whatever field you're trying to go into?
Right. Any last thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, before we close out, I think there are two things in particular, veterans. I'm talking, I certainly could have done better at it. One of them I could have done better when I was in the military. And number one, it's requesting feedback. In the military, we're pretty good about giving people feedback. Now, studies show that giving people feedback really doesn't help them that much. You want a culture where people are interested in seeking feedback. And when you get out, you want to just be always, hey, how'd I do? How'd I show up in that interview? I would take the first 5 interviews I would do, and I would just say, these are practice interviews. I'm going to learn as much as possible. Say, hey, you start the conversation before you even start. Hey, listen, I'm going to do this interview. I really want to know afterwards. I want you to tell me the truth, how I did, what I could, what one thing could I do to be better? And then you follow it up. Hey, how did it? So and then it also kind of takes the the pressure off you. Cause like, in your mind, you don't tell them, but in your mind, like, this is just practice. I don't really expect to get this job, and I'm just going to practice, see what I learn. So you do 5 minutes, you better. I have a friend who did this, and then he got accepted the very first job because they were really impressed by his seeking feedback approach. Number 2 is you got to be able to read hierarchy. Now in the military, this is not a skill that you need because we're wearing rank, and I can, that person's got 2 stars. This person's got 2 stripes. So I can tell the difference. In the military, like the lady standing in the corner in a t-shirt, she could be the billionaire founder of a company. You don't know. It's not always obvious. And so, I always felt like I was this way. I treated everybody with respect and equal, weighed their opinions equally. But I think there's still kind of this human tendency. Well, I'm going to see who's important here, and I'm going to spend my time with them. Yeah, be careful because you don't know.
Right.
You stand in line at Starbucks in Silicon Valley, the guy in front of you in a t-shirt, that guy's a billionaire. You don't know.
Right. Yeah.
So
And
seek feedback and read and practice on hierarchy, social hierarchy.
yeah, read the room consistently.
Yeah,
good
advice anywhere.
Yeah, pretty much anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're getting out of the military, you're a veteran or not. You got to read the room and actively listen to people giving you advice to make you better.
Right.
And be the best version of yourself.
Absolutely.
And
you have to know which advice is worth taking.
Right.
There's a lot of advice out there.
Yep.
So you have to be able to filter through the advice and understand because not every piece of advice is going to work well for you. It's like leadership styles. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't say follow everything. I just said seek it.
That's right. A leadership style that works well.
It, and then you can decide what to do with it, but you want to always be seeking it.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, David, and you said, Ken, is, not just like reading the room, not just, accepting feedback, but, people talk about a lot of time. You don't have to completely emulate the leader that's teaching you. You take a piece from here, a piece from there, and you can, that's where the I guess the purpose, you find your purpose by creating it in your own way, but you're grabbing little pieces here and there and getting the perspective from everybody around you to be the best version of yourself, to lead and care for the people that, are bottom up, right? In a leadership role, care is huge.
Yeah. You always want to be learning, right? You always want to be learning. Yeah, I have learned just as much from those, let's just say, not great leaders that I've worked for as I have from what people I would term as great leaders. So you have to always be a student, no matter what you're going to do. When you're in the military, you're always a student of your boss, right? You should be, right? Learning what they do. How did they get to that position? How can I get to that position? How can I better myself? And I think again, no experience here, but I think when you get out of the Navy, military, you always got to be a student. You want to learn what the company is. You want to learn what their expectations of you are so you can manage your expectations of the company. So much is just about managing expectations so you don't go in there thinking something totally off of what you're going to get, because that's not going to work well.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Well, I appreciate David and Ken being in, Everlasting Veterans podcast for this episode. You guys can go to Amazon and it comes up right away. I mean, you just type in Turn the Ship Around in Google and it comes up right away. Amazing book by an amazing author and individual, L. David Marquet. I appreciate you, sir, for taking time out of your day and giving some insight to us and everybody for this podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Ken, also for showing up on a holiday.
Yeah, David, thank you. It's my honor to get a chance to actually chat with you here like this. I never thought I had the opportunity. A week or so ago, Ryan shot me a text and I was like, "You're having who on?" "Absolutely. I want to come over and sit down." I was like, "I read his book. I used his philosophy." And so my honor to come over here today and chat with you too for a little bit, and really made my weekend. So I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and it's just a testament of what I'm trying to do with Everlasting Veteran of, past, present, and future of taking those teachings and just making it all encompassing in your life and making it more of a lifestyle, right? Of moving forward to the future of seeing your success, So I appreciate you guys. This is your host, Ryan Landry, with the Everlasting Veteran Podcast. And I just want to say to all the sponsors out there, podcasttables.shop, providing this beautiful table in this new studio for Everlasting Veteran, and Rockin' Frenchies and Meadow Ridge Wines and Danes that have partnered with Everlasting Veteran. In the first 5 months, we're able to give 5 service dogs out to 5 veterans, and Everlasting Veteran pays for that training. If you want to learn how you can be part of that mission, go to everlastingveteran.com. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, David.